When we talk about our story, many people feel like it's kind of an academic conversation. It's something that you would discuss over a latte at Starbucks, and it can be, and it can be fun. But I want you to know that everything that you do in your life, every choice you make, every decision that you make is based upon the way that you have been taught to think about yourself, and that's what your story is. Your story is your history of those who have informed you of your potential, your possibility, your limits, and the extraordinary abilities, if you are blessed to be in a family that recognize them, that are available to you through your lifetime. So when we talk about our story, we live our lives based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. Think about that, the way that your family conditioned you to think, the way that your religion has conditioned you to think, your friends, your neighbors, your community, your society, your culture, your school, the classrooms and the textbooks, the information that you receive, social media, all of the information that comes to you informs you in terms of your story, the way that you believe that your relationship to the world exists. So when you really think about this, we live our lives based upon our story. We solve all of our problems based upon our story. You choose your relationships. Every relationship that you've ever had in your life is based upon the way that you've been taught to think, consciously as well as subconsciously. Your sense of value, your sense of worth. This plays in to every intimate relationship, every romantic relationship, every friendship. It's all based upon the way that you think of who you are and what your relationship to the world around you really is all about. You know, we heal our bodies based upon our story. I'm going to invite you to think about this. If you go to a doctor and the doctor says to you, there's something happening with you that should not be happening in the doctor's opinion, how you respond to that information, it's based upon the way you've been taught to think about yourself. When someone that you respect in a respected profession informs you that something's happening to you that they recognize as being anomalous, does it frighten you? Do you trust your body? Do you trust the intelligence within the cells of your body to remedy and inform and lead you to the greatest states of health? Well, your answer to that question is going to be based upon your story. We choose our politics based upon our story. Well, that's a big deal. The United States of America has just been through a political season, as well as many other nations on this beautiful planet we live upon. And it's during those political seasons that we can sometimes find ourselves the most divided among families and friends, neighborhoods, communities, nations. And the reason for that division is because we all have a different story. We've all been taught slightly from a different perspective how we think about ourselves, and based upon that, what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. It all comes down to how well we know ourselves. We build our society. Our entire society is based upon the way that we've been taught to think. And you're going to see that as we get into the ideas that Charles Darwin prepared and presented to us over 150 years ago, the very ideas that became the foundation of the society that you and I are living today. So all of a sudden, what I hope you're beginning to see from this is that your story is more than an academic conversation. It's more than philosophical concepts. And what could be more important? Your story is front and center for everything that you do, every choice that you make, every relationship that you experience, and perhaps most importantly, the deepest relationship that you will ever have, the relationship you have with yourself. It's all based upon the way you've been taught to think. That's what this course is all about. Nassim and I have spent our lifetimes working through the language of science, a relatively neutral language of science, to understand to the best of our ability what the new stories are that are emerging, the stories that change the way we think, that empower us to solve our problems and to think differently and to share what we understand now with our families and our friends. And that's what we are doing through these modules. So this is beyond an academic conversation. So let's begin at the very beginning. Let's begin where our story begins, and it begins long before we ever emerge into this world. It begins with our cosmology. Many people think that cosmology is out there, it's all about space, but we are the product of whatever is happening in our cosmology, and our cosmology has changed over time. Almost universally, ancient texts and traditions, they tell us a story. What they tell us is that we are deeply connected to everything in the universe. We're connected to one another, we're connected to ourselves, we're connected to the cosmos, to all forms of life. They tell us that we are the product of intelligent processes that have emerged over long periods of time. I've been blessed in my adult life. For almost 40 years of my adult life, I've had the opportunity to travel and to explore some of the most isolated, remote, beautiful, pristine, magnificent places remaining in the world today, from the monasteries and the nunneries and the high plateaus of central China and Tibet, across Nepal and India, through the Bedouin traditions of North Africa, all through the Andean traditions of South America, and the Yucatan with the shamans and the healers and the curanderos, and all through the American desert Southwest and the Aboriginals in Australia and other places. And I say this because, as different as those traditions are from one another, they all share a very similar story. And that story is that we are the product of a living essence, an intelligent essence, that we are deeply connected, not only with ourselves, but with one another and with the earth around us and beyond the earth into the cosmos. For most of human history, that has been our story. But with the birth of modern science, all that changed. So we say that science began about 300 years ago, during the time of Isaac Newton, when he formalized the laws of physics. And it was with the birth of science that the term that you've all heard, where we throw the baby out with the bathwater. What that means is that when one part of an idea no longer works, you throw the whole idea out, even though parts of the idea may still be valid. Science did that when it comes to our story, when it comes to who we are in our relationship to the world. Science teaches us today, and you and I are the product, if you've been in a public school in the West in the last 150 years, if your children are in school today, unless they're very, very blessed to be in a very, very progressive system, where they are actually honoring the new discoveries. You and I have been taught a story that we're the product of a dead universe, that the universe is dead and inert, and the product of what is called lucky physics, where the conditions just happen to occur in just the right way at just the right time for the universe to form as it has formed. Now, there's a consequence to that thinking. Because if you honestly believe, consciously and subconsciously, in your mind and your heart, that the universe is just a product of lucky physics, if you believe that the universe is dead and everything is separate from everything else, that gives the powers that be the reason to think in terms of the earth being ours to exploit, to dominate, to harness the powers and the forces, because there's no reason to think otherwise. The universe is an accident. It's dead. It's separate. It's inert. That thinking is reflected throughout our culture and our society and our history. It's reflected as a lack of respect for the natural world, for example. I remember when I was growing up in the Midwest of the United States, in the 1950s, 1960s, and the interstate highway system had just been built. They were building this after the Second World War, originally to transport military across our country, never thinking that civilians would take to the highways the way that we have, and an entire industry developed along those highways, including fast food. So I remember 50s and 60s, people stopping at fast food restaurants, and when they were finished with the meals that they got in the paper cups and the paper bags and the plastic containers, they wanted to throw them away. And at that time, away simply meant out of sight. So those containers went right out the window because there was no reason not to litter. And the medians of the interstates in many cities were cluttered with paper and bags and wrappers and cups and straws for miles and miles and miles, until we developed an awareness an awareness that when you throw something away, away does not mean just out of sight. But it was a way of thinking back then, because the idea was that Earth is so vast, the oceans are so big, and there's so much land in the US that we can just dispose of things by getting them out of our sight. Well, you and I know that's all changing now, fortunately. There's a new awareness that is developing, but the thinking underlying that kind of disposal is a direct consequence of us being taught that there's nothing really special about the cosmos, nothing really special about our relationship to the cosmos. So the question is, we're running out of resources now on the planet. We're starting to look at other places. We're looking at planets to mine, the moon, for example, and the planet Mars and asteroids. Here's the question, are we going to exploit those places the way that we've exploited our own planet because of the thinking that we have been led to embrace, that everything is separate and that we are living in a dead and inert universe? Well, similar story comes with you and I. We're taught that human life is the product of random processes that just happen to occur, random mutations that just happened at the right time. Just the right atoms came together at just the right time to create just the right molecules, to create just the right proteins, to create just the right forms of energy and information for life to emerge on our planet. And when you hear that, the question is, where's the specialness? Where's the specialness if we are the product of random processes? And the implication is very similar to what's happening on the Earth. Where is our respect for biology? Where's our respect for the specialness of human life? The thinking is that life and human life is ours to exploit. It's ours to dominate. It's ours to give, and it's ours to take. And that reflection we find up showing in many societies in ways that are certainly controversial, and they're dividing us today, but they're also leading us to new understandings. Perhaps it's best summed up through a woman that I have so much respect for, Rachel Carson, one of the early environmentalists and early authors. She wrote a book in the 1960s. It was called Silent Spring. She was actually a marine biologist. The book Silent Spring was about the role of pesticides in our environment and in our lives. And what Rachel Carson said was so powerful. I remember I read it as a child, and it has stayed with me my whole life. What she said is that we only destroy what we do not value, and we can only value what we know. We can only value what we know, and that's the value of embracing the new discoveries and the new science and bringing it forward in our lives and our world, because the new science is writing a new story. It's writing a new story about the cosmos. It's writing a new story about us. We today are destroying ourselves and our planet because there's nothing in our story that leads us to do otherwise.